Oh hi! Welcome to Aquata Zoo, where we like to nerd out over all things zoo and aquarium related. I'm l.semple, and today I'd like to talk to you a little bit about overloading people with paperwork. No, I'm not advocating that we overload people with paperwork. I'm not down with 100% bureaucracy. I'm just trying to reach the folks that might need it, who may need to just rethink or revisit the use and intent of paperwork in the workplace. Okay, I'm not a fool. I know that paperwork is sometimes necessary to keep things organized, to make sure that you have enough information to continue on to next steps and that sort of thing. But when your entire operation is consumed with the movement of paperwork, perhaps we're not focusing on the right things. All I'm saying is just think about it. That's it. I once worked for an organization. It's an aquarium where we did conservation work, we did animal care, we did education, all of the things that normal zoos and aquariums tend to do. This facility was also bogged down with excessive amounts of paperwork. So that slowed down the whole operation, got everybody frustrated, and made it so that it was really difficult to meet our objectives. That's the type of scenario that I'm aiming to alleviate here, maybe with some thoughts, maybe some ideas about how to approach this sort of thing. Obviously, I cannot tell you how to run your business or how to conduct your day-to-day operations. I don't necessarily know what you do and why you're doing it, right? Just understand that sometimes these things need to be revisited now and again, and I feel like paperwork tends to be one of those things, like the amount of paperwork tends to fall to the wayside as far as being reviewed and checked to see if it still is meeting our needs. So again, there was one point in time where I worked for an organization that was really consumed with having everything written down on a physical slip of paper, right? These forms were intense. The same form was used for everything, from making a purchase to getting a new supplier or vendor onboarded to asking for time off. Like, it was ridiculous. The same type of piece of paper. It was color coded so that you knew in a stack of papers which one was the form, the universal form for all the things that you would know you would have to look at in order to get an approval or something like that. We called them the blue forms. They were blue. Yeah. They were printed on blue paper. They were used for literally everything. Nope, I lied. There's also the green form, which is used for travel specifically. But everything else went on a blue form. This may have changed since then, since I worked there, and so that's fine. But it just sticks out in my brain as something that we had to deal with on a daily basis. And it happened to be the cause of a lot of slowdown in the work because blue forms hadn't been approved for that thing or this project or that vendor. So we were really slowed down by the progress of these blue forms. Not to mention, they got lost a lot. They'd get stuck to other things. They would end up in the trash for whatever reason. They would just get lost. Who knows where that went? So then the next steps in the approval process, the people there did not know that there was a blue form for this thing or this project or this vendor. And so you just have to start over from scratch. It was a very cumbersome method of doing work. Was it the end of the world? No. Was it complicated? Yes. Did it slow things down? Yes. Was it the most efficient way of doing things? No. Could we all have revisited this and perhaps come up with something better or more efficient or perhaps electronic so that there's a record that everyone can access? Yeah, we probably could have done that. Honestly, I didn't really think about it at the time. A lot of people that I worked with didn't think about it at the time. It was just the way we had always done it, which is always, a little dangerous to say, right? Because that means you can easily fall behind as far as what is modern business practices and stuff like that. You don't want to have that's the way we've always done it as your go-to reasoning for continuing to do something, because that probably means it hasn't really been thought about in a while. And I've been guilty of it too. I'm not saying that I haven't. With these lovely blue forms, I didn't really think about it that much other than the frustration of no one's looking at the blue forms, and that's annoying. So my position in this whole mix was typically being the origination point of a blue form, right? So I wrote it for, to purchase something, to start a project, to get involved with something new, to do any number of things, to introduce new enrichment to an animal. Like all kinds of stuff went into a blue form for this facility, right? I was the one writing it. I would pass it on to the next step, whether that was my boss or our veterinarian or, other people down the line, depending on what it was, what that paperwork was for, as to who would get it next, right? And so that was also something that made these things difficult. So I would write the thing and hope that I did it correctly, because if you didn't fill out your blue form correctly, it would get returned to you. You start over again. But then I had to know, being the originator of where this is going or what is happening, I had to know who to pass it to next. So sometimes if I turned in a blue form to my supervisor because I wasn't sure where it would go, I would realize after weeks and months of it not being looked at that it needed to actually go to someone else. And no one would say anything. It would just sit there in the pile of forgotten blue forms that never went anywhere, because I, as the person who wrote it, did not correctly identify the next person that it needed to go to. So that makes things confusing. And then we just have busy jobs, right? We're all doing stuff. We're all trying to get things done. We all have our priorities. We have our deadlines. And sometimes this paperwork, especially if it's excessive, then it tends to fall behind, right? It goes to the back burner because you have this meeting coming up or this deadline that's due at the end of the week, right? All these things that are a bigger priority than reading and signing these papers. I understand it's very boring. But if you in your organization have set up this heavy load of paperwork and bureaucracy, just understand that if that paperwork is not the primary duty of someone along the line, then things are going to fall apart. Things are going to get forgotten. Things are going to stack up on a desk somewhere, and they're not going to get done in a timely manner, which kind of stops people down the line, like who started that form, from doing their work, because they need permission. They need that written okay, because that is the precedent that you have set in your organization. So the longer it gets stopped in the process, whether it's on the next person to approve's desk, but they have other priorities so they can't get to it, like the more delay there is in the form reaching its destination or having ultimate approval or whatever, however it works, the longer that takes, the harder it is for that first person who made the request to do their job. And if you're not setting aside time as an approver of these forms or an approver of these requests, then you're falling behind, and other people are likely doing the same. So understand that while it's nice to know everything that's going on, it's nice to be able to put eyeballs on it, read through it, and gain an understanding of what's going on. It's also really imperative to understand when you need to know the minutia of what's happening in a day. For example, if I'm the director of a big organization that's trying to do various different things, serving the community, what have you, got a lot of important work to do, I don't necessarily need to know that somebody really wants to buy a new printer, right? Like, yes, if we have the money for it, go for it. Buy the things that you need. If you're replacing one that's broken, okay. I don't need to know everything about what you're purchasing and why. There's got to be some kind of give or some sort of method to approve something like that that doesn't need to end up at the desk of your highest leadership or something, In the zoo and aquarium world, veterinarians have this happen from time to time for certain organizations that I've worked with. Not all of them, obviously. Every one of them's different. But I have worked with organizations that their veterinarians have to approve a lot. They have to get their eyes on stuff and understand what's going on when it comes to animal health and animal care, which is totally understandable, because if something goes wrong, the veterinarian's got to deal with it. And if it's something that puts their license at risk, they need to know, right? It's not necessarily going to be a no because it puts their license at risk. It's just that they need to know if and when their license is on the line here. It's only fair. So I've seen organizations that have a lot of keepers and a lot of enrichment ideas or training ideas or, various other modifications that they want to make to exhibits and that sort of thing that technically they want to have go through the veterinarian first before they're fully approved. And that's totally understandable because, again, the veterinarian is going to have to fix anything. If anything goes wrong with an animal, they need to be on top of the animal's health. That's their job. Understandable. But then you have to think about it. If that veterinarian is also in charge of doing regular physicals with animals and running labs and visiting the various areas of the institution and just getting eyes on the animals, if they're doing all of these other things, plus, research, papers, publishing, doing talks, like they do all of these things, right? And so if they're doing all of those other things, then that paperwork portion gets pushed further and further out of the priority. It's still important. They still want to do it. They still intend to do it, but that comes as a secondary or tertiary priority to the animal health work that they need to do. That's their primary job that they need to make sure is happening, right? And we all know that animals tend to throw curveballs to your day, right? It happened to me this week. I had an animal issue that took many hours to deal with, right? Same thing happens in all animal welfare, animal health kind of realms for zoos and aquariums. So we have to stop what we're doing and deal with that. That means other things fall behind. So when you're dealing with putting a lot of paperwork on a singular person or singular group, just understand that that is going to gum up the works at some point, because these people have jobs and priorities that are not necessarily approving this paperwork every single day. I've had facilities where we've had to fill out paperwork that is very specific to animal welfare concerns, I would say. And so you have to fill out all of this information about the exhibit that the animal's in, about the experience, about what's happening, why we're concerned, water quality parameters, birth rate or birth dates, all the animal's individual history, like a ton of information all put into this one form so that then it could be passed on to animal welfare folks and veterinarians to kind of peruse and just kind of wrap their minds around the situation, why it's happening, and how it's being addressed, right? It was a ton of information that took forever to fill out. And they wanted to make sure that none of the information was forgotten. So it was a locked Excel document that had to be filled out in a certain order and in a certain way. Otherwise, that lengthy information bit that you put into a box, if you didn't fill it out after filling out the box previous to it, it would just be erased. Endless frustration with this form, right? But then you would pass that along, and so you'd spend 20, 30, 40 minutes filling out all of this information while not dealing with said animal and its welfare issue. But at least, you finish the form and you'd pass it along to the animal welfare folks and the veterinarians so that they understood what was going on. Then they would have theoretically fewer questions about what was going on. But I, as an animal care person, then had to spend so much time doing that paperwork that it wasn't worth it. And honestly, I got in trouble for not filling out enough of those forms. Because there were things that would happen, like say in breeding time, animals injure other animals. It's pretty natural. And so we would have to fill out a form to say, hey, this animal's injuring some other animals. We're moving them out. We're going to monitor them. Like all this other kind of stuff that happens with animals, right? I couldn't be bothered to fill out the paperwork because it took so long. It took so much time out of my day that I fell behind on even filling it out, even starting the process. So I say that in an effort to illustrate times when the paperwork is not matching the work we're trying to do, right? I worked in animal care. I was trying to take care of animals. And the paperwork part of it, while it's also not one of my favorite things to do, was so cumbersome. that I couldn't do both at the same time, right? I couldn't take good care of these animals and change their welfare for the better while filling out this silly form. And just the fact that they made it so difficult to fill out properly added to the frustration. So if you find yourself in whatever business you're working in this position where you need to get approval for something or you need to initiate some kind of paperwork type stuff and you find yourself unable to do so because it takes away from doing the job that you are supposed to be doing, maybe it's time to rethink that kind of stuff. Maybe it's time to inquire as to when this is going to be revisited or coming up with solutions to make it all easier. That locked Excel document that I was just talking about that forced you to answer in a certain order or would erase your answers, that one was alleviated by incorporating it into a database that we were already using. So when we would go to fill out the form after that, once it was painstakingly revamped, it started pulling all the information automatically out of the database. So we didn't have to go in and fill out what the water parameters were and what the acquisition date of this animal was and like all of these details about the individual animal that we're talking about and the exhibit that it was in. It pulled automatically into a form, and all we had to do at that point was then just fill out what was going on and what we were concerned about. And it just automatically emailed all the parties that it needed to. And it was a much better way to do that than the locked Excel document than it was before. Game changer. Game changer. That was such a breath of fresh air, and it made my life so much easier. So the moral of the story here is consider bringing in some other type of technology, right? Just look at what's there. You might be able to take that physical form, that piece of paper that people need to sign, and turn it into a Google Doc, right? That anybody can access from anywhere. It might be easier. If somebody is, I'll just take the veterinarian again as an example, and this is no slight to veterinarians. They're very busy. If they're in place waiting to meet with keepers to look at an animal and they have their phone, they could take 30 seconds to log on, look at that Google document, click approve, and move on with their life. You know what I mean? So they can make use of what few minutes they have here and there rather than going back to their office, picking up that stack of papers and starting to rifle through them and, picking out the ones that are the easiest to say yes to and leaving the more complicated ones for later. Later becomes eons from now, So just using technology and incorporating technology into your approval processes might be a really good solution as to how to streamline this whole process. So it's less work on all of the ends. So the person that is initiating the request has an easier time of doing that, and then the approvers also have an easier time of doing that. In extreme cases, I've seen institutions that almost decide to use a shaming technique to move the process along. So I've seen institutions that will say, for example, an animal enrichment request. They want to do a new thing with an animal or an exhibit to provide enrichment for the animals in there. And so they make the request. And then it goes to, say, the veterinarian. Then it goes to perhaps their director of animal care, right? People who are in charge of what happens with the animals. It's understandable that they need to look at it and approve it, sure. But they also put this into either an electronic form that then kind of sends out reminder emails. So, hey, you are 20 hours slower than the next approver. Kind of adding a little bit of shame and embarrassment to it. Or the more obvious and low-tech option is to say, put it on a whiteboard or tracker, like a physical tracker in a hallway that everyone's walking past. And you'll see slowly that the person who is slowest to approve has the most things in their section of the whiteboard. You know what I mean? So as a request is moving through the process, the people would move the magnet or whatever through the various different boxes. And if one person had tons and tons of stuff in their box, in their section, then all people who walked through that hallway knew that was a person who needed to get on their approvals. So it's a little bit of shame. I'm not a huge fan of that one because, I don't know, it feels a little negative to me. And yes, I want the approvals to move and I want to make it obvious where the problem is. But at the same time, having it in a hallway or making it like a shameful kind of thing is not really ideal, in my opinion. So if you are as streamlined as you can be as far as like how the paperwork is produced, so if it needs to pull from a database, if it needs to be in electronic format so that the papers, the physical papers are not being lost, whatever. If you've already made those changes as well as you can get them, then it might be an issue of needing to look at the people involved, right? Like who really needs to look at this to see? How do you categorize that? How do you separate the requests, for example, that the veterinarian needs to look at versus just the curator or the director of animal care, right? I'm just using these examples because these are the ones I know the best. But how do you know that maybe a vet tech could look through them first, all the stuff that's supposed to go to the vet, and maybe categorize them first? So before they get to the vet's desk, the vet tech may have gone through them and been like, these are pretty easy yeses. This is a little more complicated. These are questions that I would have. And they, maybe put a sticky note on it or whatever, or, comments in the electronic form, right? So it's possible that as time goes on and these approval forms are located and read over and approved and just the progress happens, that you get an idea for who is trustworthy of making good decisions and who can speak on behalf of someone else, or ways so that you make sure that the people that need to make the decision are the ones that are on there and not necessarily the ones who are not needed for that decision, if that makes sense. I made an approval form once that had check boxes for the person that would theoretically be next in line according to the first approver. So, for example, I made an enrichment approval form, and where you would put in all of the information about the enrichment experience that I was trying to do and, how to buy the stuff that it needed, whatever. And then the first approver would generally be the curator, the one level above me, right, as the keeper. And so I would say the curator. And then after that, the curator could decide, I want this to go to the vet, or I want this to go to the director of animal care, or I want this to go to fill in the blank. They could literally fill in the blank. And then it would go. Because if it was something that the curator felt very comfortable with, that the vet didn't need to be a part of or didn't need to necessarily know the details of, then that's fine, right? They would let that happen. And the vet that would require a lot of trust between that curator and the vet, of course. But we were at that time at the point where the curator could answer, I'm not really sure. I would like the vet to look at this. I'm sure about this one. This one's fine. It's going to be good. It might not have been anything. It could have been like just sound enrichment, low level sound enrichment. Like nobody's going to freak out over a radio playing in the background, right? So the vet doesn't necessarily need to know that there is a radio playing classical music in the background of an enclosure, right? They would need to know if we're introducing a novel food item that could have dangerous implications if not dealt with correctly, like carcass feeding for the first time, right? That could be an issue, probably wouldn't be, but at least they should know about it before it's implemented. So in the case where we're just introducing a little bit of sound in the background of a enclosure during construction time to like lessen the impact of construction noise and just give them some classical music to listen to, like the vet probably wouldn't mind and doesn't necessarily need to know the details of that, but they would want to know novel food item that could be a problem if dealt with incorrectly, if the animal does something weird. So you see the difference there, and you have to have kind of high trust between the curator and the vet to know what those situations were. But in the end, it was helpful to streamline the approval process in some cases. So just revisit the whole process. Understand what you're looking at, what you need to refine about it. Can it be made electronic? Can it be just an email? Can it be in a Google form or some kind of online form that you can access from anywhere, even when you have a few minutes and you're waiting for something else? Can that be a change? Does everyone need to be on this approval form? Where does it need to go next? How do we address when things are piling up on one person? Do we need more than one person on it? Can that person trust someone else to help make decisions for them, even if it's just separating them out and categorizing them a little bit, just to make it easier when they do have the time to approve? Like, there are methods you can use to refine your processes, and they should be reviewed on a relatively regular basis. Is this helping us? Is this slowing things down? Ultimately, we're looking at a means to do the work that we're trying to do that might not be as efficient as we would like. My job is to deal with animals in an aquarium and manage the team that deals with the animals, right? I'm sometimes hands-on, I'm sometimes not. I sometimes approve, I sometimes need approval for the things that we're trying to do. And so it gets a little complicated. It gets a little hairy, but ultimately my job is to keep up that welfare for those animals and keep up the welfare of the team taking care of the animals. Those are my two priorities. It is not filling out forms. Yes, I understand that that is necessary. Paperwork is necessary. Approvals are necessary to get the work done too. But if I'm spending more time on filling out forms than I am doing my work, that is a problem. So this is just kind of my appeal to the powers that be in your organization, in all of the organizations, to make sure you keep tabs on what's happening and make sure that people are spending their time efficiently, not to like breathe down their necks and make sure that they're working. I'm just saying, if they were like me, where I was spending 40 minutes at a time trying to fill out a very, very frustrating form and wanting to flip my desk over it, then perhaps that is a thing that needed to be revisited. And we did, and we fixed it mostly, right? I still have to fill out a lot of these forms, but like, it's much easier now. It only takes a matter of like, say, 5 minutes instead of 40 minutes, which is a vast improvement. I don't have to go pulling records from here and there and everywhere to put into this document. It pulls automatically, and I just say, here's what's up. Here's what we're doing, right? And so everybody gets the email about it. They're all informed and everything's good, right? We revisit that process and people put some painstaking work into making it better, but it has benefited everyone. There have been glowing reviews about it just because it's so much easier and much less intimidating and useful. It's so much easier. It is a necessary thing that we have to do, of course, but it does not impede on the nuts and bolts of the job also, you know? So in your organization, if you have processes for paperwork, bureaucracy, approvals, that sort of thing, just take a look. Make sure that your folks are spending the appropriate amount of time doing those things in addition to their normal work, whether they're writing up the requests or they are the approvers. Make sure that everyone's spending the appropriate amount of time doing those things. If not, investigate ways to streamline the process, to make it easier, to make it harder for people to ignore it or resist or say no. And that will make the whole process go smoother, and you'll have a better outcome in the end. More people will be informed about what's going on, appropriately informed. Not everyone needs to know the minutia of the day-to-day, right? So the proper people are involved, they're doing it at the right pace, and it's not taking everyone so much time and taking away their focus from the actual work they're trying to do. If you have any questions about that or any other leadership or management things or zoo and aquarium stuff, just write it up in an email. You can send it to me at aquatazoo@gmail.com. If you're enjoying the show, and I hope that you do, don't forget to follow or subscribe on your podcast player of choice. That way you'll get all of that sweet, sweet content as soon as it releases. If you'd like to support the podcast directly, you can find me at patreon.com/aquatazoo. And if you're looking to take a vacation and you don't know where to start, I happen to be a personal vacation advisor with Magical Vacation Planner, and I would love to help you out. It does not cost you anything extra. The links are in the show notes. Okay. Thanks for listening. I heart your faces. Okay, bye.